Today I want to talk about cooking juicy chicken with crispy skin that's going to make your mouth water, like this one here. I'll be showing you different ways of cooking chicken, pan-seared and finishing it off in the oven, on a gas grill or a charcoal grill, and probably the most trickiest, smoked on a pellet grill. But first, let's talk about what we need to do in order to get that crispy skin without drying out the chicken. It all comes down to controlling your surface moisture and temperature. In order to get crispy skin, you need to evaporate as much moisture and render as much fat while browning the skin and achieving the Maillard reaction. That happens by increasing the overall temperature of the cooking environment, which increases the surface temperature. But we also need to avoid drying out the chicken and keeping it juicy and moist. Well, that can only happen by lowering the overall cooking environment and keeping the temperature at a happy medium. So what gives? It's actually not as hard as I'm making it out to be. We first need to increase the surface temp to sear the skin and achieve the Maillard reaction. And then we simply need to drop the temperatures, but not too low. A happy medium point between continuing to draw out the surface moisture, but also retaining the moisture within as much as possible. But first, let's tilt the odds in our favor. In order to achieve crispy skin and retain the juices inside, we need to salt brine the chicken and leave it uncovered in the refrigerator for a few days. Let me explain. Let's do two examples, starting with chicken thighs. These chicken thighs have not been salt brined. They're directly from the grocery store, and you can see how much moisture they have, both internally and just under the surface. Chicken thighs is one of my favorite things to grill, and honestly, that bone internally has so much moisture in it, and that's definitely going to help us when we start cooking the chicken. So let's look at our second example, a whole chicken. This chicken again was not salt brined. It came directly from the grocery store. The same applies, you just have more of it, so there's a lot more moisture in a whole chicken than you would with the chicken quarter, and that makes sense. So we're going to tilt the odds to our favor by trying to draw out as much moisture as possible before we start cooking the chicken, and also simultaneously tenderizing the meat. So I went ahead and dry salt brine both the chicken thighs and the whole chicken, generously with kosher salt, and left them in the fridge on the bottom rack uncovered for 3 days. And this is what they look like. Starting off with the whole chicken. You can see that the whole chicken looks much differently. It's a lot drier, almost dry aged. That's because the salt has lifted a huge amount of moisture from the surface of the chicken and within. And it's pretty evident when you look at the drip tray. There's a lot of moisture that has been drawn out of this chicken. Most of it is from the surface, and that's exactly what we want. The salt's doing a couple things for us, but it's also tenderizing the meat by breaking down and denaturing those protein strains, while also aiding in seasoning and flavor. Not as much as wet brining, but we'll leave that for another video. And I know, this doesn't look very appetizing, but salt brining your chicken in the refrigerator uncovered for a few days is actually incredibly important. You've essentially dry aged your chicken, sort of. I've already done a video on salt brining thick cuts of steak and the benefits of doing that. If you guys haven't watched that already, I'll put a link to that video in the description of this video. But basically, salt is a fundamental ingredient, and you really do need to master it and know how to use it to manipulate the results that you want. I promised you guys I was going to do a video on chicken and salt brining chicken, so here you have it. Okay, let's get to work. Starting off by cooking chicken in the most traditional way possible, pan searing it and then finishing it off in the oven. Always lay your chicken skin down. We want to render as much of that fat that's just underneath the skin and evaporate as much moisture as possible to ensure we get crispy skin. And then we can finish it off later in the oven. It's super important to understand the Maillard reaction and how browning happens. Basically, we're caramelizing all that fat. Browning is more than just coloring the food. You're also converting the sugars and amino acids. So how are we doing so far? Let's take a listen. Not too bad, but I want to brown it just a bit more. Utilize your pan and the corners of your pan, tilt the oil, and try to render as much of that fat as possible and brown the skin before we put it in the oven. That's a whole lot better. It's time to put the chicken in the oven. In the oven, the cooking process continues, and we continue to draw out moisture from the surface of the chicken as well as internally, as the chicken thigh reaches our desired internal temperature. We set the oven temperature at 385 degrees Fahrenheit, compensating for my particular oven. We don't want the environment to be too hot, but we also don't want it to be too cold, because we want to cook the chicken thoroughly, but we also want to continue to crisp up the skin, keeping a close eye on the surface temperature, and we're going to use this method throughout this entire video. Let's take a listen. This chicken thigh is done, and it's cooked to perfection. Moist, juicy, tender, and perfectly crisp chicken skin. Let's take a bite. In order to monitor our cooking temperatures, I'll be using my trusty predictive thermometer made by the folks at Combustion Inc. Which brings me to a third option, cooking the chicken below the USDA recommended internal temperature of 165 degrees. See, that temperature is actually a catch-all to avoid general foodborne illnesses, but in reality, chicken's safe to eat at much lower temperatures if you manage the cooking environment, and it all comes back to the fundamentals. So when bacteria hits a temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit, it's a quick and swift death. But just like us, lowering the temperature to, let's say, 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 150 degrees Fahrenheit is still very unlivable. And if that temperature is held there longer with no relief, the environment is simply too uncomfortable, and death comes at a slower pace. The only way previously I knew how to achieve that, with chicken at least, was to use sous vide. That's why with sous vide, you can cook chicken at a much lower internal temperatures without getting sick, because sous vide will hold that temperature for a long period of time, killing the bacteria. Well, until now at least, because this thermometer can also help you achieve the same results with its Safe Cook technology, which kills 99.999% of bacteria, and it's going to tell you exactly at what temperature and when that happens, so you can cook your chicken at lower temperatures. I'm not going to get into this today, but I do plan on making a separate dedicated video looking at Combustion Inc.'s Safe Cook technology and comparing it to sous vide, because I know some of you may not own this particular thermometer yet, and I want this video to be a bit more approachable. Okay, so as we talked about earlier, to get great chicken, grilled chicken, pan-seared chicken in the oven, it doesn't matter. It's this balance of controlling your moisture and your heat, and finding that sweet spot. I recognize you're not always going to do a dry rub. There's times when you're gonna wanna marinate your chicken. And this is actually counterintuitive of salt brining. And an easy way to get flavorful, moist, juicy chicken is by marinating it overnight. But can you still get crispy skin? Absolutely. Let me show you how. And it all starts right here. We've preheated our barbecue grill. And in this particular case, it's a gas grill made by Monument Grills. Preheating your barbecue grill, your pan, your oven, whatever, is just another way of controlling your heat, and it's extremely important. Now, I don't need to insert a thermometer for every single piece of chicken, but having one piece of chicken that I can control closely, and then I'll poke around with the other chickens using an instant read, will give me an idea of where each chicken's at, because we don't want to over dry them out. And with the predictive thermometer, we're going to be keeping a close eye on the surface temperature, which is going to tell me how much moisture is evaporating and when to slow down or speed up in the cooking process. And that's kind of the beautiful thing with gas grills. You have control of the heat like you would indoors on your stovetop because you have knobs, which gives you instantaneous control. So it's really easy for me to set my temperatures, set my zones, and work with the chicken to get the desired results that I want. But what if you don't have a gas grill? What if you're cooking on a charcoal grill? The same logic applies. Control your charcoal grill's temperature by controlling the charcoal. And the way you do that is by controlling the vents and the airflow. Now, it's not as instant, and you still have to give your charcoal some time to adjust to get the temperatures that you want, but it's very possible. If you're interested in finding out how to control your charcoal grill's temperature, for example, on a Weber kettle, I have a video on that and I'll link it in the description below. But really the secret is ensuring that you're preheating your grill and using zone cooking. It's just a lot easier with gas grills. Once you've allowed some time for the Maillard reaction to happen, browning, and that skin's moisture has evaporated, and the fat just underneath the skin has rendered, just like you would if you were pan searing inside the kitchen, you're basically halfway there. You can now flip the chicken and move the chicken to indirect heat. I like to move the chicken to an indirect portion that's still surrounded by heat. So, for example, with this gas grill, it would be the middle portion, and then I would turn off those middle burners and allow the outside burners to stay on. Now, I don't want the temperatures to be extreme, right? I don't want them to be at 500 degrees, 450 degrees plus, but I do want them to stay hot. I found over the years that over 375 degrees Fahrenheit inside the grill is more than enough to maintain a good temperature for that moisture to still evaporate and continuously happen. So you ensure that you're gonna have crispy skin, but not to over dry the chicken's internal temperatures and draw out too much moisture from inside. It's sort of a balance, and it's going to get easier with experience. And to be honest with you, it was trial and error for me. And of course, it's super important to have a thermometer that can monitor the ambient temperatures, but more importantly, the surface temperatures, because your barbecue grill's gauge will lie to you. Now, if you don't have a fancy wireless thermometer, you can always buy a grill grate gauge, say that 5 times, and put it directly on the grill grates next to the chicken, and that will give you the most accurate ambient temperature relative to the chicken. Okay, so we've actually hit an internal temperature of 168 degrees or so. I'm actually gonna pull the chicken and let them rest, and that should take the temperatures right at 170, 175, where I like my internal temperatures for chicken. I've found that that's probably the best sweet spot to keep them from drying out and still cooking them safely without, for example, utilizing the safeguard technology that combustion ink has. So we're gonna go ahead and pull them out now. There's just something about grilled chicken. This thing is so juicy. Look at my hands. Oh man. So there's no doubt that was delicious. Juicy, the skin was perfect, crispy. I've shown you guys what to do when you're pan searing, put it in the oven, showed you guys the gas grill. But I think the biggest challenge for most of you out there on the grill, I think most of you guys are having an issue with a pellet smoker. So in general, how should you approach smoking chicken on a pellet smoker? And is it really any different? If you guys haven't guessed it already, it always goes back to the intro, following the basic steps of cooking.
Okay, let's do now a dry rub. I'm going to be using the Fogo rub, one of my favorite rubs. This is fantastic. I'm not trying to plug them. They're not paying me to do this, but I really like this rub, especially for chicken. Also works great for steaks. It gives off a very smoky taste, and when you're cooking with charcoal, it goes hand in hand with Fogo charcoal, but also when you're cooking on a pellet grill. Make sure you season generously on both sides of the chicken.
Okay, look, so if I'm being honest, I'm probably least confident with pellet grills than I am with gas or charcoal grills. For a very long time, I really didn't own a pellet grill. So essentially to me, what a pellet grill is, it's basically a giant automated oven. But I would say that most pellet grills, their number one weakness is they can't sear with an open flame. This particular grill is a AI smart grill made by Brisket. It's a fantastic grill. It will actually automate the entire steps for you. You can ask it to cook basically anything and it will control the temperatures to the bone. So if you never cooked something like a brisket, for example, this can make it very possible. It's a great grill. Check out my review. I think it's fantastic. It gets up pretty high up there at 500 degrees, and checking the grate temperatures, it's pretty spot on. So it can sear, but it can't sear with open flames because it always has a diffuser plate on it. So in general, I'm gonna approach this like I would with any other basic cooking knowledge. I'm not gonna use the AI feature. We're gonna rely on my experience. We're gonna take it up to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm gonna put the chicken skin down. We're gonna go ahead and sear it until I get some browning, and then we're gonna drop the temperatures to about 375 degrees and let the chicken cook from there.
Let's take what we learned today and let's keep applying it. We're gonna preheat the pellet grill, bringing the temperatures up really high, so when we place the chicken skin down to get seared for that Maillard reaction, we can get proper browning. I always make sure that my chicken's laying flat. It's a common mistake when people butterfly chicken. After searing the chicken at 450 degrees for about 35 minutes or so, let's check on it. The Maillard reaction is alive and well. It's time to insert our thermometer and finish the chicken off by lowering the temperatures to a happy medium at 375 degrees. Combustion Inc.'s safeguard technology actually told us that the chicken was done at much lower temperatures, but we kept going to 175. And here's what the chicken looks like. Absolutely fantastic. Perfect crispy skin, and you wouldn't believe it if I told you that this was cooked on a pellet grill. So there you have it. Even with the pellet grill, you can still achieve the impossible. So what about if you're smoking chicken? Doesn't matter what cooking tool you ultimately use, as long as you follow what we talked about today, controlling the surface moisture and ultimately your temperatures. And dry brining is always going to work to your advantage. Smoke your chicken at 225 degrees, or whatever you like to smoke your chicken at, for at least 45 minutes with the skin down to infuse smoke, but at some point, you do need to increase the temperatures to draw out the surface moisture and get browning. Then just drop the temperatures back to a happy medium. Let's say 375 degrees to finish the chicken and retain the internal moisture, but still eliminating as much surface moisture as possible in order to get that crispy skin. With the pellet grill, since there are no open flames, it's a bit more tricky, which is why having a thermometer is so handy, because you can monitor surface temperatures, and I found if you keep it at around 200 degrees Fahrenheit for those surface temperatures, you will get great results. So play with the ambient temperature a bit to achieve those surface temperatures. But if you don't have a predictive thermometer, just use a probe and take the measurements just under the surface of the skin. But I think we can all agree, doesn't matter if it's pan-seared, gas-grilled, charcoal-grilled, or pellet smoked. Crispy, juicy chicken is always welcomed in my belly. That's it for me, guys. I hope you found this video informative, and if you did, please consider subscribing and joining our channel memberships. I'll catch you in the next video. That's good chicken.